Um, I mean, this is like so this is I think this is an interesting topic that we'll be discussing today. It's I mean, maybe it will be a bit confusing now what we are doing to people, but it all makes sense, I think. So
It all comes together.
yeah. So we're doing now we're in
Wait, has the episode started?
Yeah,
No.
is this for us or for the listeners?
I don't
Or
know.
for both?
I
be both.
guess for the listeners, but
Well, why don't we introduce the show?
yeah, that's maybe a good idea.
Yeah, you are out of sorts. That's usually your job to remind me.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to The Empire Never Ended. With Boris, Fritz, and Ray. The whole crew is back together. Of course, the freeloader listeners didn't even miss you. Didn't even know you were gone. But our patrons had to suffer a whole episode without you, Ray.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that was unavoidable.
Yeah,
But I'm back.
We told people you were on a vital puppy mission. And,
That's Our mission was successful.
Great. The puppy is now successful.
Yes.
Yes. He's a communist now.
Yeah, I guess.
That was the casual mention of puppy.
Yeah, it was actually part of the Tennis space program that we're building here in the Bosnian pyramids.
Oh, that's sad though.
It was successful.
Yeah, the puppy's alive.
This time he made it all the way to Italy. Yeah, the puppy's alive. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, what is this episode about? So we're in a kind of already in quite a few episodes in this arc, which eventually will become what it's supposed to be, and that's an arc about Serbian and Croatian anti-communist terrorists in the Cold War era.
Yeah, you happy now, listeners? Huh?
Yeah. But so far, Boris was mostly like, mostly Boris was giving us like an introduction to like Yugoslav and Slavic immigrants in America, and also kind of shedding some light on the fact that most of them in the early days, the ones that were politically active, were actually kind of the opposite of the people that we were supposed to talk about. Many of them were communists, socialists, even some anarchists, and so we had an introduction of that type to the topic. Now I'm gonna, instead of actually talking about the topic, finally, I'm gonna give you a different kind of introduction.
Hey,
we're not right in the head. None of us are okay.
That's the old Tenepod method.
But believe me, this makes sense. Okay, and it will be soon clear why. So we are going back to the old country, to Serbia, in the period before the First World War.
Of course.
Yeah. But this is like surprisingly closely related to the topic of our arc. Like like it's almost like, directly related to it, which is even surprising to me. And this is like in a way what this and the next 3 episode is about. This connection that I think not a lot of people really didn't pay much attention to, this connection here. Okay, some of this will be maybe based on some speculation, but I think it will be interesting in any case. So many people know about, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand by the young Bosnia people in 1914 in Sarajevo, which triggered the beginning of the First World War, which started by Austro-Hungary invading Serbia. And some people even know about a mysterious Serbian nationalist organization called the Black Hand that also had some role in these events. What I'm talking about today is kind of related to that, but that's not exactly the topic of this episode. But we are kind of setting the wider context in Serbian politics of the time that enabled a lot of these things to happen. And maybe we'll shed some light on an aspect of this story that not a lot of people are aware of, I think. And by the end of the episode, you will learn how this is connected to the actual topic of this arc.
Are you also saying that to yourself?
Yes, probably. But I mean,
All right.
okay, you already have some elements here. Okay, Serbian nationalists, terrorism. So it's not really that far.
Yeah, the
removed.
old standards.
Yeah. So okay, Serbia, in the beginning of the 19th century, became a de facto independent state. First, as a kind of a autonomy inside of the Ottoman Empire, but like a really an independent state, which it achieved through the so-called Serbian Revolution or the two Serbian uprisings against the Turkish authorities there, and in the Berlin Congress in 1878, this independence was officially confirmed and recognized internationally. Also of Montenegro at the same time. Both states' independence were recognized at that Congress. So in the beginning of the 20th century, Serbia is more or less in the same borders that it was throughout the 19th century. It's quite a small state. So, what is now north of Serbia, the province of Vojvodina, is not a part of Serbia. That's a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Also, Kosovo is not a part of Serbia. But Serbian nationalists have ambitions. They're surrounded by two hostile empires, the Ottoman one and the Austro-Hungarian, but they have really great ambitions, like to create either a greater Serbia or some kind of a Yugoslav state, unifying all the South Slavic people in the Balkans. And these two ideas are not necessarily always contradictory, in the minds of people who advocate them. Because for many of the Serbian nationalists, basically Greater Serbia is the same as Yugoslavia, and there is not a lot of, and at the time, this is a different age. So a lot of Croatian nationalists are very pro-Yugoslav at the time and pro-Serbian, and see as the Serbian state as a kind of an example of, Slavic independence in the Balkans and like a friendly, brotherly state and so on. So it's a different time, being a greater Serbian or Yugoslav is not necessarily some kind of a contradictory thing at the time. Although there are real differences between people, although in that respect, some are clearly more Yugoslav and some are clearly more Serbian chauvinists, but it's like a spectrum, let's say. So before 1903, Serbia is ruled by the Obrenović dynasty. Although it has to be said that throughout the 19th century, the Obrenović dynasty and the Karađorđević dynasty were kind of changing. They were occasionally, one dynasty was in power, and then someone would assassinate the ruling prince or king, and then the other dynasty would come, and so on. They were
check out Arc 2.
Yeah. They were founded both by two guys like Karađorđe and Miloš, who were the respectively the leaders of the first and the second Serbian uprising, who were best buddies ever until one killed the other one, and their kind of descendants continue this tradition of killing each other. And but also it's kind of pretty remarkable that Serbia had not one but two domestic dynasties, which is quite unusual in Europe and in the Balkans. Like most European countries have dynasties of foreign, by that we mean mostly German origin.
Right.
Britain, for example, has a German dynasty. But also, Greece, their dynasties like Danish, but they're actually a German family.
Right.
Romanians, Bulgarians as well. Even Albania had like a ruling prince from a German dynasty.
Wait, was King Zog German?
No. King Zog was post First World War. Pre First World War, there was some German guy that appointed to be the ruling prince of Albania. And then post First World War, the president of Albania declared himself to be the king. And he was also an Albanian. And also Montenegro had a Montenegrin dynasty.
Right.
But Serbia had two, and they were not really in love with each other. So in 1903, the Obrenović king Alexander and the queen Draga Mašin were violently, deposed. They were assassinated. There was a conspiracy of officers, the military officers, who slaughtered them basically and killed them. They broke into the palace and shot them and slashed them with their swords and then threw them off the balcony.
Yeah.
Completely mutilated their bodies. This was in Serbia, this was like a welcome thing because the king was kind of an authoritarian asshole. No one really liked him.
Plus, it invented the word defenestration.
Okay.
As of now, I guess.
So they threw them off the balcony, their mutilated bodies. Serbs liked it. No one in Europe really liked that at all. And it was like, even like the Obrenović dynasty was very pro-Austrian. So up to that point, 1903, Serbia had like an politics that aligned it closely economically and politically with Austria. So obviously Austria-Hungary didn't like this, but also the other countries didn't like that. Like the United Kingdom broke its diplomatic relations with Serbia because of this, and they again had diplomatic relations 3 years later, I think in 1906, right? So it was like quite a controversial thing.
It was the legitimate government,
yes,
of hereditary monarchy.
Yes, I mean the monarchs don't like when someone does that, even if they don't like the monarch who's being killed. And so the people who did this, as I said, were army officers who didn't like the king, and they were also aligned with the competing dynasty, the Karađorđević dynasty. So they kind of debated, should we have a military government? They decided no, we shouldn't. So they made a new civilian government, which was composed of some of the conspirators from the army, but also from all of the parliamentary parties that existed then in Serbia. So you see, pretty much all of the parties were on board with this thing going on. So the new government was, created, and the parliament elected a new king from the Karađorđević dynasty, which was King Petar or Peter the First Karađorđević, who was like privately, ideologically, some kind of a liberal, like a Democrat. And so this period from when he came to power until the start of the First World War is usually seen by Serbian, especially Serbian bourgeois, kind of liberal historians, and some kind of a golden age of Serbian democracy. So, I mean, of course, there was more of these kind of bourgeois freedoms of speech and so on, politics, than before that. So there was quite a lively political life. Often there were elections and so on. Also, kind of an unstable system. I think in that period, since the May coup, when the old king was killed, and the start of the First World War, which was only 11 years, I think there was 18 governments, I think.
Oh. Yeah.
So there were two main political parties. One was the oldest Serbian political party, which was the Radical Party, which in the 19th century started as a socialist party. And by this time, it's firmly a conservative party, like a right-wing conservative pro-capitalist party. Mm-hmm. And then the other main party is the left wing of the Radical Party, which formed its own political party, which is called the Independent Radical Party, which you could call it some kind of a liberal party or left liberal party, let's say. And in the first elections after this coup, these parties almost had the same amount of votes. I think the Radical Party got 43% of the votes, and the Independent Radical Party got like 40% of the votes. And throughout this period, it was mostly like that. So, which kind of made the system a bit unstable. It was never, completely clear which party is completely like predominant. So the people who did this coup and killed the king, the army officers, at the time, they didn't have any kind of formal organization, and they wouldn't have one for quite a long period after that. But this episode is partially about them as well. They're the future Black Hand. Especially the younger generation of these conspirators are the people who will start the Black Hand some years later.
So this is like a spin-off series from Arc 2, really.
Yeah.
This is the Better Call Saul Arc 2's Breaking Bad.
Yes.
Which Better Call Saul is kind of better than Breaking Bad.
That's Arc 4 is all about that.
So maybe Arc 4 is better than Arc 2. Hopefully.
Yeah. Pressure's on, Ray.
Yeah. So obviously, the people who did that coup were hardcore Serbian nationalists, primarily that, more so ideologically than anything else. Like kind of in Serbia, you have this thing of kind of pure nationalism, which is not really, so much right wing or left wing or Republican or monarchist or anything like that. It's just like nationalism.
Right.
Like the idea is we need a greater Serbian state. And really,
Don't you mean a natural Serbian state?
Yeah. But
I love when they start throwing out those terms, like different types of terms for the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, if you like any Albanian nationalist text always refers to like ethnic Albania.
Yeah.
Or like, it's like, well, yeah, you mean like where Albanians live in 4 different states.
Yes. Which is like what Greater Serbia also means.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But Serbs have a more kind of flexible idea of what Serbs are. So, occasionally it can even be Slovenians. Or only Orthodox Serbs, So it doesn't, it's very flexible. But, for example, these people who that I'm talking about, they are nominally monarchists, but they kill the king.
Right.
So that's like a total abomination to any kind of a monarchist, like a conservative traditionalist or anything like that. So, but they just don't care if the king is bad.
Bipartisan support for regicide.
Yes. So, okay, so we have a new king, new regime, and everything. Or it needs to be said that even though this was the golden age of Serbian democracy in terms of bourgeois democracy, there was also lots of repression of socialists, especially. This is the time when the Social Democratic Party was formed, which had a Marxist leadership. They were kind of a small party, but they were a parliamentary party. But, you also had anarchist groups, anarcho-syndicalists, you had revolutionary syndicalists, and quite a very small proletariat, but quite organized and militant, who went on a lot of strikes, but were kind of heavily repressed by the state.
Uh-huh.
Like there was a famous strike in 1907 in the sugar factory in Belgrade, supported by the anarchists and the revolutionary syndicalists, but not by the leadership of the Social Democratic Party, who thought it's too radical because it's an illegal strike. And weirdly enough, or not weirdly enough, because they were Marxists, they thought it's a bad thing to have too many strikes because you wouldn't have enough of foreign investments, which is needed in a backwards country like Serbia to develop socialism. You need to develop capitalism first through foreign investment. So if the workers don't strike too much, this won't happen. And so this strike, for example, was it was completely killed through gendarmerie, which is this kind of militarized police, was sent there and killed a bunch of workers who also were shooting at the cops. So it was there was stuff going on that usually people who talk about the golden age of democracy won't mention.
Proper 19th century labor violence.
Yes. Yeah. So the usually the party that's kind of although I said it's never completely clear which party is dominant, in a way maybe I was wrong. In some sense, the radical party is the one that's usually in the government, and at least their leader Nikola Pasic is the dominant political leader of the time, and they are now trying to change the politics of the previous Obrenović regime, which was totally aligned with Austria and aligned more with France economically and also with Russia. And they have, these nationalist ambitions. There are 2 dying empires on their borders that completely surround them, and they want, to liberate the territories held by those empires, which are, populated by Serbs or Yugoslavs. And in some cases by Albanians that they just want to, conquer in some sense.
Right.
So their ambitions, especially in the early days of the 20th century, are more looking towards the south. So they are interested in Kosovo and Macedonia, and it's more so Macedonia than Kosovo, actually. Although Kosovo today is kind of, the heart of Serbian nationalism. Really, at this period, they were more kind of interested in Macedonia, and we're talking much more about Macedonia than Kosovo.
As was everybody else, seemingly.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so both territories, they are very closely to each other, and they are controlled. They are legitimately part of the Ottoman Empire and recognized by everyone as such, even by Serbia, Austro-Hungary, all the European powers, and so on. So already before the king was deposed, the old king was deposed in 1903. In 1902, something like a group was organized in Macedonia by Serbs from Serbia, which was called the Macedonian Committee. Now, this is like something that you, like, for context for this type of activity, you should listen to our VMRO episode. I don't know which one was that, about the episode about the revolutionary nationalist organization that was active in Macedonia, pro-Bulgarian at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Second to last,
yeah,
I think, episode in the second arc. No.
Yes.
Yeah. 42, 43, something like that.
Yeah.
So the Serbs were kind of inspired by what Macedonian Bulgarians, or whatever you want to call them, were doing at the time in Macedonia, and inspired by VMRO specifically. So they organized their own kind of revolutionary nationalist organization, which was called Macedonian Committee. It was supposedly at the beginning a kind of a private initiative, but so in 1904, in the new regime, what this organization started was the Chetnik movement, which we also talked a little bit about in the VMRO episode. So Chetniks, or in the early ages also called Komite, because they were started by a committee. So this is why they have this also name.
It made a brief appearance in Cat People, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. The main character stops one guy from calling a waiter.
Yeah.
Call me tea or something like that.
Yes.
Right.
So they're in a regular, like, paramilitary organization, which is funded by Serbia covertly to wage war in parts of the Ottoman Empire that they have interested in, but they cannot wage war openly against, a legitimate, control of a certain territory, but a state they recognize. Mm-hmm. So through this committee, they organize this kind of guerrilla movement and fund it covertly. So in 1902, the Macedonian Committee was started. In 1904, the Chetnik Action, as it called, was started, and Serbia started sending volunteers to Macedonia. In 1905, the year later, the state takes over the Macedonian Committee. Like, now it's a covert organization completely run by the state. And at this period, it is renamed Serbian Defense, Srpska odbrana. That's the new name of it. It is completely controlled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Serbia. It's basically functioned as a department of it. And it's a covert, like, it's not like a public political organization. It's a kind of a covert intelligence network involved also in armed struggle, sending volunteers, smuggling them over the border, organizing guerrilla groups, and sending intelligence information back to Serbia. Is what they do. Officially the ideology is, the liberation of the Serbian people from the Turkish occupiers, and all of that.
Right.
So a little bit about what's politically going on at the time. So as I said, Serbia is really kind of dominated by these two powers, but especially Austro-Hungary at the time. So almost all Serbian politics at the time are completely dependent on the Austro-Hungary. So they are, for example, 60% of imports come from Austria, Serbia, but 93% of what Serbia exports goes to Austria. So they have a complete control of Serbian economy. But the Austrians want even more. They're kind of suspicious of, they know about these Serbian activities. They don't like them. At the time, they're mostly directed towards Turkey, not towards Austria, against Austria. But still, they're like kind of very suspicious about it. And they're really insisting on like one business deal, the Austrians are. And this is that the Austrian company Škoda, Austro-Hungarian company, gets the deal to supply Serbia with cannons.
Škoda being the current auto manufacturer,
yes,
in Europe.
Wild.
Yeah.
All right.
So they are putting a lot of pressure because Skoda was in financial problems at the time, and they really needed this deal. Like it would be a lot of money for them to supply Serbian military with cannons and other military equipment. So even the Austro-Hungarian emperor was like personally lobbying for this and putting pressure, and his son Franz Ferdinand as well. Serbia didn't want this, didn't like this, because they were very dependent on Austria, and they saw Austria as a potential military enemy in the future and didn't want to be also militarily dependent on them. So they, in 1906, they made a big, a large financial deal with France and took like a loan from them for these purposes to kind of renew their military. And this resulted in Austria putting sanctions towards Serbia. So this is the so-called Pig War started then.
Ah, right.
Which lasted from 1906 to 1911, with Serbia was under, economical sanctions by Austro-Hungary. But kind of Serbia used this situation for its own benefit. So they started developing other economical relationships with Italy, Egypt, France, Sweden, Russia, and especially Germany, which is interesting because Germany was the Austrian, ally, but really Germany kind of really developed economical relations with Serbia at the time. So Serbia really kind of, in a way, benefited from this situation, and it was a more kind of autonomous relation towards Austro-Hungary as a result of this. But it created a lot of tensions, obviously. So in the middle of this tension, Austro-Hungary decides to do another thing, which is in 1908 they annex Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yeah, the Pig War, I guess, was called because most of Serbian exports to Austria were pigs, I presume.
Most of Serbia's exports, I think, period, were pigs.
Yes.
I think even like in their early relationship with the U.S., right? They sent pigs.
I mean, by the way, the two dynasties that I mentioned, their founders were both like pig merchants.
Right.
So in the 19th century, so yeah. And like a wild boar was in the first like emblem of Serbia, like revolutionary Serbia of the early 20th century. So yeah.
Which has made a comeback recently in certain circles.
Oh.
That flag.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Okay. I mean, that's a flag of like an invented ethnicity in the Balkans called
I was going to
Tribali.
ask. Yes, that's the Trivali logo. Yeah, I remember now. Mm-hmm.
Probably invented. I don't know. That's what they say. So, as I said, like Bosnia was, according to the Berlin Congress of 1878, the same one that recognized the independence of Serbia and Montenegro. Bosnia was officially, a part of Ottoman Empire, but it was kind of ruled and administered by Austro-Hungary. And so in 1908, the Austrians were just like, fuck it, it's ours. And they just declared it's part of Austro-Hungary. And this also created like a lot of commotion in Europe. Nobody really liked that, because it was like a illegal move. And Serbia really didn't like that because Serbia, although it was focused on Macedonia and Kosovo, they also considered Bosnia like a Serbian state, like a Serbian land that needs to be liberated. And so this really pissed them off. And there was like immediately lots of demonstrations, like mass demonstrations all over Serbia. There was a lot of tensions with Austria. There was a lot of talk of war with Austria, even words used by Serbs as holy war against Austria and such things. And another thing happened. So you remember the Serbian defense, which started as the Macedonian Committee. So we had the Macedonian Committee, it became the Serbian defense. First, a private initiative, then basically a part, like a covert intelligence/guerrilla organization controlled by the state. Now, it is reorganized again as Narodna odbrana or as National Defense. This is the new name. Now it poses as an independent organization started in 1908 as a result of this annexation of Bosnia by Austria. And it has a covert and like a public face to it. It functions as organization of Serbian patriots who are organizing demonstrations against Austria, sending humanitarian help to Serbs in Bosnia, and gathering like money and donations for them and so on. But also it is organizing volunteers for Chetnik detachments. to be sent to Bosnia. So, like a lot of experience and practice that was used in Macedonia is now being focused on Bosnia from this point on.
Right.
And they are basically planning in a way to have a similar approach to Bosnia as they did to Macedonia. So the Narodna odbrana, or the national defense, was founded in this kind of atmosphere of nationalist mobilization against Austria and massive demonstrations and talk of war. Like people were like, we will attack Austria, which is pretty insane, but they were like into that. I mean, okay, but this was like more kind of propaganda stuff and people, getting in a frenzy. But it was a big deal for a lot of European powers. And, Serbia had some support in feeling outraged because most of European powers were outraged. Like they were uncomfortable with this move by Austria. So there are demonstrations. They are burning Habsburg, like Austro-Hungarian flags and such things. So national defense, so Narodna odbrana, is quickly formed. Also because it was not actually formed, it was an already existing network which was renamed. And in about a month, they have like more than 200 chapters across Serbia, and it is said they have like between 150 and 300,000 members. So
wow,
that's what is claimed. I'm not sure how reliable this is, but they also are starting chapters abroad. So there is a chapter in Russia, and straight away there is a chapter in the United States. It is what it said. But their focus, in addition to Macedonia, where they already have this kind of network developed, which is really aided by the way, completely aided in using Serbian official channels. So they're like their communication is going through diplomatic channels, and even I'm just going quickly back to Macedonia and Kosovo. In that area of the Balkans, Serbia had 4 consulates. It had one in Pristina, had one in Bitola, had one in Skopje, and one in Thessaloniki. And all of these Serbian consuls, diplomatic guys in those consulates, were a part of this network of the national defense, and before that, the Serbian defense, and were participating in smuggling arms across the border, organizing chetniks, getting supplies for them, and so on. By the way, the chetniks are paid, so they're called volunteers, but they have pay, which is pretty good. It's bigger than what a teacher would get in Serbia at the time. And not only that, but when they're not doing the chetnik business, they get good state jobs back home. So they become cops, clerks, jobs in the army, and so on. So it's quite attractive to a lot of people to do that. Although it has to be said that the Serbian chetnik detachment in Macedonia was by far the smallest one active in that area, because I think they only had 15 or 20 chetnik detachments, and there's more than 300 or almost 400 other similar paramilitary detachments, which were Greek, Bulgarian, Albanian, and even Turkish ones, because I think you had the young Turks there who were really kind of doing their own thing against the central government.
Right.
So I think in 1911, all of these groups combined in Macedonia, they did more than 200 political assassinations and clashed with the Ottoman Empire more than 150 times or something like this.
Damn.
Right.
So really, the Serbs, they're kind of a small part of this, but they want to be there because their goal is to, when they're predicting a collapse of the Turkish rule in the Balkans, and they want to divide Macedonia territorially between Serbia, Greece, and Bulgaria. So that's their goal. Also, they have an ambition to conquer northern Albania, so Serbia would have Adriatic, a connection with the Adriatic coast. So that's kind of what they're doing there, just to be a part of the action. So when they defeat Turkey, they would have a claim on this territory. Really,
there's also a lot of, parallel things happening at the same time in other parts of the Ottoman Empire. There's a lot of stuff that's very similar happening with Armenians, right? And different Armenian groups that are active in the Ottoman Empire, some of which may or may not have support of the, different, like, for example, the Russian state or something.
Yeah.
So kind of all throughout there, you have they even have very similar appearances physically. These kind of like bands, armed groups or whatever.
Yeah. By the way, the National Defense, it's some of their early proclamations, they say how they're gathering Ustasha fighters. So they use the term Ustasha for like Chetniks or committee. So that was even, because, of course, it's the same language and Ustasha means insurrectionist. So why not? But it's funny.
Yes.
So now in this new situation, they're trying to apply same tactics in Bosnia against Austro-Hungary. But, Austro-Hungary is kind of also near its end, but it's not so obvious that it is. And it's a bit more agile state. But the Serbs are developing this kind of guerrilla intelligence network in Bosnia. So they have a guy who's the head of the national defense in Bosnia, a guy called Rade Malobabic, and he's organizing this network there. And, the network involves ordinary peasants, also people living in the cities, also some Muslims as well. But also, cops, agents, army people, and so on. And they are organizing, like, throughout this period, they are organizing, smuggling of volunteers from Bosnia to Serbia who are trained in Chetnik camps. So there is one camp in the town of Chuprija, which is run by a guy, pretty crazy guy called Vojislav Tankosic. So Vojvoda Tankosic. Vojvoda is a Chetnik title, which is like a Slavic, I guess, old medieval title. In like when it's used in like the context of aristocracy, it's usually to English it's translated as duke.
Right.
But it also has this other meaning of basically warlord or something like this. So Chetniks use it in that sense. They are like the leader of a Chetnik detachment is a voivoda. And at the same time, the Serbian army uses it in a different sense, because the highest rank in the Serbian army at the time, which is basically the Serbian version of the field marshal or marshal, is also voivoda. But that's a different kind of voivoda in Serbia, like a completely different thing.
Also famous metal band from Canada, Voivod.
So this voivoda Tankosic is running this training camp. He's also one of the main commanders in Macedonia, and he's like a guy who's pretty wild. He's one of the founders of the Black Hand, which I'll talk about soon, and kind of the right-hand man of the leader of the group. And he's training people. He's training Chetniks there, including some of these young volunteers from Bosnia. And he's like a guy who's like known, like he's a courageous kind of fighter. Some would say total maniac. And he's also known for like personally like slaughtering deserters and things like this. Like, the word slaughtering, like with killing with a knife, is used. And he's quite a wild guy. He's also known for beating up politicians, including threatening the prime minister of Serbia, jumping on his car and yelling at him, and things like this. So that kind of a guy.
All right.
But so there's all of this, tension. People are getting ready for war in 1908, but in 1909, this annexation crisis is still going on. But in March of 1909, Austria gives Serbia an ultimatum saying, okay, you need to accept that we annexed Bosnia, recognize this. You also need to give us guarantees of your friendship, to demobilize your military, and also completely dissolve the irregular paramilitaries that you're organizing. And so at the time, kind of the European powers accepted the annexation, including Russia, which was a big Serbian supporter. They made a deal with Austro-Hungary and accepted the annexation. Also, apparently Turkey was paid off by Austrians to accept it. So Serbia was kind of left alone, and they had to accept the annexation, which they did soon enough, I think also in March of 1909. So when that happened, the National Defense Organization had to be kind of officially restructured from a group, organizing paramilitaries for a war against Austria into a cultural association. That's like how they officially existed. But in reality, they continued organizing this network in Bosnia, but for the time being, not for the purpose of starting a war, just being ready for one if it eventually happens, let's say. So kind of a less militaristic, less aggressive approach, but the network remained. But this, by some hardliners, was seen as a kind of a compromise, as a betrayal, even a capitulation, hardliners from the Serbian side. So this really, this change, it triggered the foundation of another group that's important for this. This is the already mentioned Black Hand, or as it was officially known, Unity or Death, which is their official name. Black Hand was really what they were called by other people. So the conspirators of 1903 who killed the king are still around. They are networking with each other. They are the Chetniks. They are the leaders of the Chetniks. They are training them, commanding them, and so on. And they are also part of the National Defense Organization. But now they decided, okay, the state, the government is too weak, and they are organizing their own secret society. So the formation of this group started already, probably, according to some, right after the Serbian acceptance of the annexation. Officially, it was organized in 1911, but probably existed in some form before that. And as I said, it was called Unification or Death. In 1911, when it was started, they also started this is a secret organization. Like it is modeled under, according to European 19th century nationalist secret organizations, like the Carbonari in Italy, for example, who are a kind of an offshoot of the Freemasonry, but explicitly kind of liberal nationalist, Italian organization that, they are the leaders of the Risorgimento or the unification of Italy. So these people are kind of modeling themselves on that. And there are some concrete influences. By the way, the same influences are present in the mob, for example. So a lot of these similarities come from the same source because they are modeled or directly influenced by the groups like Carbonari in the 19th century. So the leader of the group is the guy that I didn't mention so far somehow, which is called Dragutin Dimitrievich, but is better known under his nom de guerre, Apis, which in Latin means bee. He called himself a bee for some reason. So he was one of the leaders of the regicide of 1903, and he's kind of after that period is seen as almost an unofficial minister of defense. He's like the gray eminence of Serbian politics in some sense. Like he's seen, it's a public secret that he's a kind of a very powerful guy without really having a powerful position in the state at this point. And he's also kind of a ruthless, crazy guy. He's one of his best friends is this Stankosic, the guy that I just mentioned, running the Chetnik training camp, threatening the prime minister and so on. And so Apis, he's like a very large, heavy guy who has a completely bald head. So he's kind of you notice him when he's in a room, also I think kind of loud and so on. And also a bit of so one of his friends and political ally was a guy called Slobodan Jovanovic that we mentioned before, because during the Second World War, he was the head of the Yugoslav government in exile in London. But he was, at this time, he was kind of an ally of Apis and wrote about him. And he wrote about him as being a fanatic who much more valued the success of some cause than the lives of people. So he even recruited his own young nephew to the Chetniks, and this boy died when he first tried to cross the border to Macedonia, he got killed. So he was like a guy like that, kind of using people for a nationalist cause that he was fanatically really attached to. So now this relationship between the national defense and the Black Hand, or as it was officially known, unification or death, is a bit unclear. Like a lot of these things that I'm talking about are not very well researched. Only in the recent years there is some more deeper connections are being made. between these things. Like, for example, the existence of this first incarnation of the national defense, which was called Serbian defense, was really only became known in the last 10 years when some volumes of documents were published. It's like a set of books called the Foreign Politics of Serbia from 1903 to 1914 or something like this. So it's like many documents that were published and edited, and in them you can find out about some of these things. It was almost never written about, especially this early history of the Serbian defense. So what is the relationship between these two groups? It is not completely clear, but I have some idea that I will try to communicate. What is the relationship between the Black Hand and national defense is maybe connected to things like, this Stanković wanting to beat up the prime minister and such things. Or Apis being the kind of gray eminence of politics and not having an official position and so on. I feel like there's a lot of tension between them and official politics of the Serbian state. So there is a lot of, they have the same opinion in some sense, but these people are much more fanatic, which is also now why they were founded when Serbia agreed to the Austrian ultimatum, which, I mean, like what they were supposed to do, like at the moment, like be invaded by, they will be soon enough invaded by Austria, but it's also kind of a crazy thing to agree upon, especially because it's not like they had much choice there. They annexed Bosnia and that was that. But for these people, this was like not a right move. And I think in that kind of mentality and attitude, you can see why some things happened in the next years that happened. So there's a lot of other kind of tension, between these paramilitaries and the state. For example, one of the main headquarters of the Chetniks in the south of Serbia, on the border with Macedonia or Turkey, was this town of Vranje, which is today also on the very south of Serbia. And so there was a Chetnik headquarters there, and lots of ammo, and arms that they used was stored there. But at some point in 1908, about 60 Chetniks appeared in front of the office of some state official there and demanded they be paid because their pays were late. And were quite violent and loud and threatening, and this guy was scared. So he called Belgrade and said, listen, send me the money right away, or I'm sending these guys to Belgrade. And indeed, there are reports that they would go to Belgrade, So they would also go to Belgrade, to the offices of some officials, and were very loud and annoying and violent. And so there is one clerk writing how he's embarrassed because all of these Chetniks come all the time and demand money. And right next to his office is the embassy of Austro-Hungary. And it's kind of very embarrassing, the Austro-Hungarians are seeing their paramilitary coming there and demanding to be paid.
Awkward.
Yes. So interestingly, when Austria annexed Bosnia, before the Ottoman Empire kind of agreed with that, there was some attempt of Serbs to have some kind of alliance with the Ottomans against Austria. So there were some negotiations around that, but also they had contacts with Albanian clans, and especially this Stanković, the maniac, was kind of in charge of that and had some connections and went there to Albania and had some agreements with some of the clans who were Ottoman loyalists and were apparently ready to go to war with Austria. So there was some possibility of some kind of a Serbian-Albanian agreement at the time.
Right. Wasn't Stanković had some sort of relationship with Isa Bolletini, no?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sorry, you're going to have to explain that name, I think.
Oh, geez.
Can't just drop a name like Isa Bolletini like it's nothing.
I mean, Isa Bolletini is... How do you summarize a guy like that? Isa Bolletini was a major figure in Albanian independence history. I think he was one of the signatories of the Albanian Declaration of Independence. I can't name drop the League of Prison without explaining what that means.
You're Fritz. With that question, you're about to start like a 10-episode offshoot addition to this arc.
Yeah.
So okay, now this kind of type of networking and intelligence work through national defense is going on in Bosnia. This was previously only going on in Macedonia. You have these networks of basically spies and intelligence people sending information back to Serbia, smuggling weapons to Bosnia, sending volunteers to be trained to Serbia, and so on. So the network exists. Okay. So the Black Hand, as I said, was organized by the military people. It had also civilians participating in it. So if national defense, had maybe potentially hundreds of thousands of members, the Black Hand probably had around 2,000, 200, 500 members. It's not completely clear because it was never really, only partial lists of members were found. So it is not clear who was all member.
That's kind of even more than I expected, honestly.
Yeah.
So these guys didn't just leave their membership lists at the nearest dump so some FBI guy can...
No, they didn't do that.
Conveniently pick it up?
At some point when there was an actual trial against them, people did find like almost, hundreds of names.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not really... They didn't do the best job of hiding that, I think. The leader of the civilian contingent of the Black Hand members was a guy called Ljuba Jovanović Čupa. So Čupa was a kind of interesting character. He, in the days of the Obrenović dynasty, he was their enemy, and he was a student. He came from a poor background, managed to become a student at the University of Belgrade, and was kind of a leader of the student demonstrations and student movement against the Obrenović regime, and was like a hardcore Serbian nationalist, but in this kind of national liberation, anti-imperialist kind of romantic way. So by some of the older members, like Gacinović, for example, of Young Bosnia, Čupa was called as the leader of Young Serbia. So something like a Young Serbia actually did exist, like a kind of a romantic nationalist movement of young people. Like usually it is discussed because such groups existed in parts of future Yugoslavia which were controlled by the empires, like especially Bosnia, but also Dalmatia and other parts of Croatia. But something like that existed even in independent Serbia. So he, after the regime was changed, now the regime that was friendly to him was in power. So he received a grant from the state and went to study in Brussels. And when he was studying in Brussels, he really went into detailed study of European nationalist secret societies like Orbonari and so on. So he got a lot of ideas from that. In Serbia, he started a group and a journal, and this is really what we mean when we talk about this Young Serbia, this journal and the group around it, which was called the Slovenski Jug, or Slavic South. And it had this kind of romantic nationalist, anti-imperialist politics. So obviously, because he was the ally of the army military conspirators against the king, they remained in contact. So when in their mind the Serbian regime kind of capitulated and agreed to Austrian demands, they got together and started forming this new group, the Future Black Hand. And I think a lot of these, the form of the Black Hand was influenced really by what Čupa, learned about groups like Carbonari and so on. So, for example, when you would become a member of this group, they would take you to a dark room, and you would be placed in front of a table which had a knife and a revolver and a cross on it, and then a person wearing a black robe with a hood and a black mask would approach you, who wouldn't say anything. Someone else would instruct you what you're supposed to do, and you would basically take a note that you're becoming a life member of this secret organization, that you will dedicate your life to its goals, that punishment for betraying them is death, and such things. So, kind of sounds familiar, I guess.
Yeah, I hope the fucking post office can stop these guys.
Yes.
The Black Legion.
Yeah.
Ostash is also almost exactly the same, no?
Or the
Sans the black hooded guy, but
yes.
Yeah.
So as I said, they have their own newspaper. So although they are really secret organization, they have also a public face to it, although they don't recognize that they exist as such, but they have a newspaper, which is, run by this guy Chupa, and it's called Piedmont. So Piedmont, of course, being the Italian state that kind of is seen as leading the movement for Italian unification. So this is how they see Serbia as some kind of a Balkan Piedmont that will unify Serbian or Yugoslav lands. Chupa is obviously more open to some kind of Yugoslav idea because, his magazine is called The Slavic Youth, the first one. The second one is Piedmont. But they also, you clearly see that they have some kind of proto-fascist leanings. Okay, this is very early on. It's 1911. But in this magazine, Piedmont, they write about, the kind of how parliamentarism is lame, and so is democracy. It kind of disunites the nation, and they're all for limiting political freedoms. They are for a centralized state, and they openly call for a kind of a cult of a state. They don't think that Serbs are like state is enough, and they really they call for, literally, they use the word cult of a state. They are both against the government and the opposition, by the way. So they don't support any political parties and are kind of against parties as such.
Also kind of familiar.
Yeah. They also write about socialism, and they don't completely reject the idea. They say it seems they believe it will eventually be realized, but they think it will be not very soon at all. And that even when socialism is realized, nations will remain, like the idea of a nation will remain, which is why it makes sense to be a nationalist. And also before this state, this kind of a society without property is realized, and Serbs will gladly join it, they say, Serbs need to remain warriors and really militarized because there are a lot of powers that work against them. So, fine, when social revolution comes to Serbia, we will join the society without property and classes, but for now, we're ready to go to war with powers that are against us. That's kind of
interesting.
What they say. Obviously, they are against class war, but they're also against capitalists. So that's also kind of pretty fashy, because they're for kind of class cooperation and the state really resolving the differences between classes and, creating some kind of balance and so on. So their goal is really the goal of their actual secret part is to, have as much as control of political life they can. So they infiltrate the state. They have people who are part of the government even. So one person who is rumored being a member is a guy who we mentioned before. It's Milorad Drašković, who in the Yugoslavia later became the Minister of Interior and was assassinated by young communists in 1921 for being very repressive towards the left in general. But his son is the guy who later lived in America and was one of the prominent members of the John Birch Society.
Right.
Yeah. His son is Slobodan.
Yeah. We'll get to him in a few episodes.
How did John Birch Society haunts every part of this podcast, doesn't it? I thought for sure, there wouldn't be a John Birch Society connection in this episode.
Yeah, so a dad of a John Birch Society member was a member of the Black Hand.
Yeah, this is a guy who wrote books that characterized Tito literally as a vampire, I think.
Great.
Oh, cool. We should read that.
That sounds pretty good, yeah.
So one other politician was a guy who was a member of the Black Hand, was a guy called Milovan Gavrilović. He was not the minister, but he worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he will be important later in this arc because he's the link between the Black Hand, one of the links between the Black Hand and the later anti-communist terrorists that were active abroad. He's like the actual link. He's a guy who's the member of the Black Hand and is later the advisor to an actual terrorist group that exists in the West in the post-Second World War period. So they have this organization. They also, so this Tankusic Vojvoda with his camp is going wild. He's threatening the prime minister, jumping on his car, yelling at him. They are also having ideas maybe they can kill Nikola Pasic, the leader of the Radical Party, who's the most prominent, like, important politician at the time. They actually plan to poison him at some time. Tankusic in one of the meetings of the Black Hand says, like, let me just threaten him and also the Minister of Interior. Like, I will personally go and yell at them and they will, like, calm down. They have, like, lots of military members. So just before the First World War started, one of their members became the commander of all Serbian troops on the border with Austro-Hungary. So they have a lot of actual power. And so they refuse, for example, to be controlled by civilian officials at all. They don't recognize them. They don't recognize the cops, the state, or anything. Like, they think that they are above them. And they're like, get really annoyed when someone tries to control their behavior or something like this. So one of the biggest conflicts between the Nikola Pasic and his government and the Black Hand happened after the state decided to make some kind of it's not a law, it's something, I don't know how you call some kind of a legal document that's lower than a law, but that's
a suggestion.
Yeah. Something like this. Because, okay, so now I'm a little bit jumping here because, okay, in 1912 and 1913, Balkan Wars happened, the first one and the second one. And Serbia was victorious in them. And this, and it kind of realized most of its nationalist goals in Macedonia and Kosovo because it conquered those territories. They actually became a part of Serbia in that period. Just briefly before the First World War started, Kosovo and Macedonia became a part of Serbia. So the goal of, the national defense in those areas and the Chetnik action kind of realized, and they were supposed to be happy with that, but they were not. These areas were basically kind of, they say liberated, but kind of occupied. There was like a military regime there. But at some point, the state decided that political civil officials are above military commanders in those areas, and the Black Hand people didn't like that at all. And like this is what caused one of the reasons for the conflict, why they even considered killing Nikola Pasic, basically the political leader in Serbia of the time, because they just didn't want to be controlled by the civilians or the state. So what I think is that the Black Hand, really what the relationship between it and the national defense is that they decided that they need their own center of power that will be not, the center of power of the state. Like, they will have their own parallel state. So they would use, because they had, they also had people in positions of power in various ways. So they used the channels of the national defense that were established by the state previously, but they used them in their own way, not always with the knowledge of the state. And they could do that. I can explain how they did that. But so in the Second Balkan War in 1913, Apis, he actually becomes the head of the army, of the military intelligence. Okay, so he actually has a lot of power now, officially, like in official channels. At the same time, for years, the Black Hand they're not only members of the national defense. Their guy, a close ally of Apis and like a member of the leadership of the Black Hand, is also the general secretary of the national defense. So they have people in power in that organization. But there are people in the national defense who are not Black Hand loyalists, who think they work for the Serbian state. So there is some kind of miscommunication and conflicts there going on, which is important when we talk about the Franz Ferdinand assassination in 1914 and who is responsible for it, because there are different theories about that. So, there is like, it's interesting that just before the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in 1914, there is a lot of the conflict between the Black Hand and the Pasic regime in Serbia is at its height. So you have like public affairs, like in the newspaper of the Minister of Interior, like a Pasic ally, Stojan Protic, saying how they are like the parts of the military in Serbia have like these kind of Praetorian ambitions. They want to take power and to have a military regime. So this is discussed publicly, and people in the parliament accusing Apis of wanting to do a military coup and things like this. So it is like this is like going on before the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So at some point you have a suggestion, like in there is some communication in the Black Hand, like we have some already formed and active groups in Bosnia who we can just attach to the Black Hand. They're already doing their own thing. So we know that, the so-called young Bosnia, it was kind of ideologically different from the Black Hand. They were like very young, often like pupils, really, like going to high school, young kids who were like really kind of romantic nationalists with some social leanings. Some even had some anarchist sympathies, but they were, primarily nationalist in this kind of anti-imperialist national liberation sense. And they saw Serbia and even Chetniks in what they were doing in Macedonia is in a very unrealistic, romantic way, I would say. And they were very poor, and you can have sympathies for them. They are not like these Chetniks, like they're different type of person. And it was noted that they are a very different type of person even by the Chetniks and a lot of other people who kind of saw them hanging out. It was a very big contrast between them. So these type of these pupils and students from Bosnia, they were kind of more kind of Russian nihilists than these guys that we talked about so far. If that means anything to you or anyone, but
it does.
Yeah,
young people who like bombs.
Yeah, idealist, kind of romantic. Often quite, literally nihilist in the sense many of them have tuberculosis, probably thinking they will die. Also kind of depressed. Also very much into Nietzsche. Some with kind of even, I have to say, kind of incel vibes a little bit going on there. So a lot of things going on there.
All right.
So they use these networks. Some of the older... by the way, Young Bosnia was never a formal organization, so it's a bit weird to say members of Young Bosnia. It was kind of a milieu, like it was a network of groups, of basically affinity groups. So some of the older ones were definitely members of the National Defense and of the Black Hand. For some of the younger ones, which will become more important in this whole assassination of Franz Ferdinand business, it was not completely clear if they were members, like Gavrilo Princip, if he was a member of Young Bosnia. Some people say that he was, some people said he wasn't, but his name is not on any list that was ever found. But it is alleged that there are many more names that were never found, that most of the lists were destroyed, so we don't know. But we know that Gavrilo Princip and other people who participate in the assassination of Franz Ferdinand used the channels of national defense to go to Serbia. They went to a camp run by Tankosic, were trained by him, were armed by him. They wanted to become Chetniks. Tankosic apparently said no to them. So in some accounts it is said that he said because he felt pity, because they were kind of too young and frail. And Princip was especially hurt by this because he was not allowed by Tankosic to join the fighting in the Balkan Wars. Some other people say that actually Tankosic had another idea for them. He thought, okay, these guys they're not the greatest fighters. They are kind of fanatical. They're sick. They will probably die soon. So maybe we can sacrifice them in doing this other thing.
Yay.
Yeah. So, according to some authors, and what they suggest happened was that Tankosic had this idea and basically sent them and got permission from Apis to use them in such a way. And so they were kind of ready to die and basically wanted to die assassinating Franz Ferdinand. They got, from the Black Hand, they got cyanide pills that they were supposed to swallow after they, did assassinate him and just kill themselves. I think there were 6 of them, and they, after this training and discussion and decisions, they used again these channels of the national defense to go back to Bosnia with weapons that had a different channel. Then they eventually got their weapons when they arrived to Bosnia. They traveled through city to city from Serbia, then a network of safe houses in Bosnia until they arrived to Sarajevo. Before they left, apparently Tankosic gave them a kind of a card which had a code on it, which would allow them safe passage where they went. If they gave it to some officials working on the border, they would know that they need to let them go. But what I mean when I say there was kind of a double power going on in the national defense, partially controlled by the Serbian state and partially by this, basically kind of a deep state element.
Yeah, I was going to say it's sounding like a proper deep state by this time.
Yes, which the Black Hand was. So when they crossed the border, they were met there by just an ordinary peasant, maybe not so ordinary, in Bosnia, called Jakov Milovic, who was the agent of the national defense and the Serbian state. And he did what he was supposed to do. Like, they don't ask questions like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Like, they are sent by the organization through these channels and they let them go. They give them what they need and let them go. But I don't know if this was normal practice or something was suspicious to this Yakov peasant guy. He wrote a note to a guy that he was his superior in the National Defense Organization who was in Serbia. These people passed. They were like some pupils. They had so many bombs, revolvers, so on. And he wrote, I don't know what they're doing. Like, I don't know where they're going, what they're doing, which is interesting. And
I mean, that's good. That's good OPSEC there.
Yeah,
right?
Yes.
As opposed to a lot of the other stuff we've seen.
Yes, yes. So his superior in the national defense wrote to the main leader of the national defense. The main leader of the national defense wrote to the Minister of Interior of Serbia, Stojan Protic, and Stojan Protic wrote to Nikola Pasic. So Nikola Pasic actually got a memo saying some young guys are using the national defense channel, going to Serbia with guns and bombs. We don't know what they're doing. So Nikola Pasic, who was the prime minister at the time, apparently discusses this with his government unofficially. He's apparently worried, starts an investigation. He suspects that Apis has something to do with it, starting an investigation against Apis, the leader of the Black Hand, and is apparently trying to stop these young guys of traveling where they want to travel. He's using some ways to stop them. But the thing is that a lot of people in the national defense channels are not under his control. They are under control of Apis. So this is how I see it. I mean, some other people see it in such a way. Some people don't. There are people who claim that Pasic knew everything and that it was his idea and so on. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, he also kind of saying afterwards, like, I was kind of horrified of this idea that they want to do this. Like, we had some idea of the destruction of Austro-Hungary and creation of something like Yugoslavia, but I thought this will happen in 10 or 20 years, not now,
Right.
and so on. But anyway, we know what happened. I mean, they went to Sarajevo. Franz Ferdinand, like an asshole, came there for a parade. Like, in a country they knew that like lots of people hate him, and there's this whole network of guerrilla fighters and spies and terrorists.
Yes.
But he went there, and they actually succeeded in killing him in the 28th of June, 1914. And it was almost like they almost failed. It was a miracle that it happened, because they all of them kind of failed doing it.
I always called it like a Keystone Cops type of thing, where it's like really like hilarious mishaps.
They were throwing bombs. The bombs were like bouncing off the roof of the car, exploding. They wounded a lot of people. So like the attempt happened, it was not successful. And Franz Ferdinand was like, "What the fuck is going on?" Yelling at the mayor of Sarajevo, and like, "Okay, it's fine. We are now changing the route. We're going back." Like, after this unsuccessful attempt, and then the driver fucks up and goes to the old route and drives right next to Gavrilo Princip, who already gave up on this thing and is eating like in front of some like food store. and he sees like, what the fuck, this is Franz Ferdinand again here, after we failed to kill him. And at that moment, like, the driver realizes that he went through a wrong route, but he goes into reverse, but his car gets, like, is stuck.
It stalls out.
Yeah, and Garvilo kills him, which is like, it's almost like he had to kill him at that point.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
he showed up in front of him and his car was stuck. I mean, that's like...
Yes.
So, yeah. And so obviously the Austro-Hungary is very pissed off. Although there is an idea that they were pretending to be pissed off, that they kind of sent Franz Ferdinand there to be killed because he was an asshole and kind of annoying them. But who knows if this is true. Also, there is an idea that the Black Hand thought that the young Bosnians will fail and that they sent them there to fail, and that they were kind of surprised when they were actually succeeded. So in this theory, they were sent there to fail and for this to be an embarrassment for the Pašić government, and so in order for them to gain more power because they were also against the Pašić government. So there is some credence to that, because the leaders of the Black Hand were arrested by the Serbian government immediately after that, although they were released soon after that, and then arrested again, which I'll tell you soon about. But when they were first arrested, for example, when they were arresting Tankusic, he allegedly said, when they asked him, why did you do this? He said, like, out of spite to Pašić, like something like that. So who knows what happened there, but we know that Austro-Hungary was very pissed off, and they now had a second ultimatum after the one in 1909 towards to the Serbian government. And the second point of that ultimatum was that Serbia needs to dissolve national defense as an organization. And they sent memorandums to various countries all over Europe detailing how the national defense organized this assassination and what was its role in recruiting Chetniks, organizing, smuggling weapons, and so on. So they kind of knew what was going on.
Right.
And they didn't mention Unity or Death or the Black Hand, but only national defense as a group responsible for this. They also demanded that Austrian officials go into Serbia and do the investigation on their own to suppress this anti-Austrian movement that exists in Serbia, which is also kind of showing that probably they knew, because it seems to me they knew there was a kind of autonomous deep state thing going on in Serbia because of this kind of a demand. Like why would you, like, if you truly believe that the Serbian government ordered this, why would you demand of them to let your cops go in and investigate the anti-Austrian movement and organization in Serbia? Like,
right.
If the Serbian government did that, then the Serbian government is that anti-Austrian organization.
Right, yeah.
Right.
But Serbia refuses this, and a month after the assassination is invaded by Austro-Hungary, and this is the start of the First World War. And during the war, so this is like pretty much a catastrophe for Serbia. There are many victims, a lot of dead people, and the Serbian state is basically destroyed at the moment, completely crashes, and the state apparatus, together with the military, goes through Albania to Greece, to the Thessaloniki, where they form a new front there, the famous Thessaloniki front. But when they arrive there, they arrest Apis and his associates, and all of a sudden they have a trial in the middle of this catastrophe against Apis. The accusation is that the Black Hand and Apis tried to kill the Prince Regent, so the King Peter's son, Alexander, who will become the king of Yugoslavia after the war, who was before that quite close and a friend of Apis, but their relationship soured in the years before that. And so they accuse Apis of trying to assassinate the Prince Regent, which was probably not true, but who knows with these guys, but probably not true. Probably the real reason was that at the time they were in some kind of negotiations with Austro-Hungary to stop the war, and they wanted to get rid of these guys. So probably the real reason was the actual assassination of Franz Ferdinand. And sometimes they would say this unofficially, that this was the reason. Anyway, interestingly, Apis admits in a written statement that he organized the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. he does that. This is now disputed because the way he did it was that he was apparently tricked. Someone told him, like, if you admit what you did, we'll let you go. And he kind of really believed that he's very powerful, that no one can do anything to him. So he did admit in a very detailed way. How true or authentic it is, it's, debatable. But anyway, yeah, it didn't help him. He was executed. And not all of them were. Like, some people were testified there and maybe said some things against Apis and so on. But, for example, one guy, which is especially kind of was interesting, is this kind. I think he's called Milan Ciganovic. He was like a member of the the inner core of the Black Hand, also of the National Defense, and was closely connected to Young Bosnia, and was one of the connections between Young Bosnia and the Black Hand, and had a pretty big role in this assassination of Franz Ferdinand. But interestingly, he was not executed. What they did, they sent him to America during the war. So he spent his war years in United States. And although we know that the National Defense was immediately had a chapter when it was started in Serbia, had a chapter in America. Also, we know that in 1914, officially, Serbian National Defense was started in America as a kind of an offshoot of the original National Defense in Serbia. So whether this guy, who was like one of the leaders of Black Hand, had something to do with it or not, I really don't know.
And the thousands of volunteers went from the U.S. and Canada to go fight in the Serbian and Montenegrin armies.
Yes. But I found it interesting that like a Black Hand guy actually lived in America for some time. So that's in short what this episode is about. And it's important for this arc because, as we've finished by saying, that Serbian National Defense, as an offshoot of the original National Defense, was founded immediately in America. And that organization is closely related to the topic of this arc. And in a way, maybe we'll see, were the future anti-communist terrorists in some way some kind of a new incarnation of the Black Hand? Because they officially did say that they are inspired by it. And in a way, they were the more kind of militaristic wing or faction of the same organization as the Black Hand was, the National Defense, except this time in America. So that's something that we'll talk about in the future episode.
Damn.
In the very near future, I think, right?
Well, yeah, I think the next 3 episodes we'll discuss about the actual National Defense in America. Then after that, we'll go more into their militarist terrorist offshoots.
Right.
All right. Interesting. Worlds colliding here.
Yeah, it's going to get weird.
Yes. And not to mention that in the end, there is even a connection with organized crime and groups that exist now. So maybe we'll discover that the Black Hand actually still exists.
Shit, maybe we should quit podcasting and just option this as a show to HBO.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad show, I think.
This is pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Black Hand still exists in the form of cocaine smugglers. Operating out of like Peru, right?
Yes.
Excellent.
But also attempting to kill politicians and so on. So they're
the old traditions.
No, keeping it real.
Yeah.
I mean, there are actually a few young Bosnia affiliated people that end up in the U.S. later.
You know, there's that series. I've never seen it. It's called How I Met Your Mother. People watch it. Yeah. I feel like this is like How I Met Your Mother for how the Black Hand met the CIA eventually.
Yeah.
You know, it's the romantic prehistory.
It is, yeah. I mean, some part of it is romantic, also quite gruesome and sad, but...
Well, for the CIA, you know, that's what they see. That's like their mating ritual, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. How I Met Your Motherland's deep state.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like, this is like, I also think important in a way because we'll talk a lot about, CIA and how it used these people and so on. I think it's like important to say how, Balkan people have their own kind of crazy deep state.
Yeah.
It's not only, the CIA. There's at some moment they kind of collided and did things together, but, they're crazy.
But like a para deep state.
Yeah. Yes.
It didn't even enjoy the official like power and recognition as like the CIA or like the KGB in that sense.
Well, listen, like he was the head of the military intelligence, so but they had their own kind of black channels, which I think is how.
But later they go like underground and operate like clandestinely in the U.S. If we are to,
yeah, that's true. That's true.
If we are to take this thesis that like the Black Hand continued in America via like Serbian National Defense.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, that's what we're taking.
Well, they were they were like at that point they were like deep state immigrants, so they were like second rate. Like they were like the bosses back home, but in America they're like whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Some of them had like shitty jobs in America, but like we're like doing like hardcore intelligence on the side. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, for your listeners, see you next week, and patrons, see you soon.
In a few days,
but probably a little bit late, like it's been. Still summer mode here.
Bye.
All righty. See you later.
Bye.
Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.